Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Before everything went to hell, my life was something close to perfect, or at least as perfect as you could hope for in this messy, unpredictable world. My name's Mike, and for as long as I can remember, motorcycles were my everything. The roar of the engine, the wind in my face, the freedom of the open road. It was like nothing else mattered when I was riding. When I met Kate, she told me flat out she wasn't into bikes. She didn't like the noise, thought they were dangerous, and said she'd never understand the appeal. I laughed and told her she was missing out. A few months later, I had her on the back of my old Harley, her arms wrapped tight around me as we cruised down the highway at sunset. She got it after that. We got married a couple of years later and settled into a good rhythm. Kate worked as a nurse, I was a mechanic, and between the two of us, we managed to scrape together enough money to buy a small house in the suburbs. Life wasn't fancy, but it was ours. When our kids came along, Jake first, then Maddie a couple of years later, I figure my biking days were numbered. But to my surprise, Kate encouraged me to keep riding. "It's who you are," she'd say. "I don't want you to lose that." So I didn't. I started teaching Jake about bikes when he was still in diapers. I'd sit him on the seat of my Harley, his little hands gripping the handlebars, and tell him all about the parts that made it go. He'd babble back at me, half the time not even forming real words, but I didn't care. Maddie wasn't as interested in the mechanics, but she loved sitting in the garage with me, coloring while I tinkered. Those moments were the kind of thing you look back on and wish you'd appreciated more when you had them. One summer, when the kids were 10 and 8, I finally convinced Kate to get her own bike. It was a secondhand Honda Shadow. Not too big, not too powerful, but just right for her. We spent the whole summer riding together, the kids tagging along in the back of the car when we went to meet friends at bike rallies. Those were some of the best times of my life. And then it all changed. It was a Saturday in late September, one of those perfect autumn days where the air is crisp and the trees are just starting to turn. Kate and I decided to take the bikes out for a spin while the kids stayed with my parents. We were on a quiet back road, the kind with barely any traffic and plenty of curves to keep things interesting. I was leading, Kate a few lengths behind me, when it happened. I don't remember much about the accident itself. One minute I was cruising along, feeling that familiar rush of freedom, and the next everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my body screaming in pain. Kate was sitting in a chair by the window, her face pale and drawn. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "You were hit," she said, her voice trembling. "Some idiot ran a stop sign and clipped your back wheel. You went flying." I tried to move, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Panic surged through me. Why can't I feel my legs? Kate's eyes filled with tears. "The doctors, they said there's a chance you might not walk again." I didn't walk out of that hospital, or any hospital after that. The reality of my new life hit me like a freight train. The man who used to race bikes and fix engines was now stuck in a wheelchair, struggling to figure out how to do basic things like getting out of bed or using the bathroom. Kate tried to help at first. She really did, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. "I didn't sign up for this," she said one night, her voice shaking as she stood in the doorway of our bedroom. "I can't do it, Mike. I can't be a nurse at work and at home." I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring in my chest. "You think I signed up for this? You think I wanted this to happen?" She looked away, guilt flashing across her face. "It's not about what anyone wanted. It's about what I can handle. And I can't handle this." A month later, she was gone. She left me a note on the kitchen counter, some bullshit about how she needed time to figure things out, how she hoped I'd understand. And then the kicker: "I'm leaving the kids with you. They need stability right now, and I'm not in a place to give them that." Stability. That was a good one. She was walking away from her husband and kids, but sure, let's call it stability. I had no choice but to step up. Jake and Maddie were confused and scared, and who could blame them? Their mom had walked out, their dad was in a wheelchair, and their whole world had been turned upside down. But I wasn't going to let them down. The first few months were brutal. I had to learn how to do everything differently, from cooking meals to helping with homework, all while dealing with the crushing weight of my own anger and grief. There were days when I wanted to give up, days when I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. But then I'd look at Jake and Maddie, and I'd remember that they didn't ask for any of this either. They needed me, and I wasn't about to let them down. Life wasn't perfect, but we found our rhythm. I sold my Harley to pay off medical bills and used what was left to make the house wheelchair accessible. Jake started helping out in the garage, fixing up bikes I couldn't ride anymore, but still loved working on. Maddie threw herself into art, filling the house with paintings and drawings that made the place feel less empty. We became a team, the three of us against the world. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kate had abandoned more than just me. She'd abandoned them. The days after Kate left were some of the hardest of my life. At first, I kept expecting her to walk back through the door, to apologize and say she'd made a mistake. But the days turned into weeks, and the only thing that came through that door was reality. I was alone with 2 kids, stuck in a wheelchair, and I had no clue how I was going to pull it off. Jake was 12, Maddie was 10, and they were both trying to figure out what the hell was happening. They didn't say much about their mom at first, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. "Why did Mom leave?" Maddie asked one night as I was tucking her into bed. I froze, trying to find the right words. How do you explain something like that to a 10-year-old? She needed some time, I said finally, hating how weak the words sounded. "Is it because of your accident?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, sweetheart," I said quickly, even though part of me wasn't sure if that was true. "This isn't your fault, and it's not mine either. Sometimes adults make bad decisions, and we don't always understand why." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied. Hell, neither was I. Jake was quieter about the whole thing, but his anger came out in other ways. He started slamming doors, arguing about homework, and spending hours locked in his room playing video games. One night, after yet another shouting match about his grades, I wheeled myself into his room and turned off the TV. "What's going on with you, kid?" I asked. "Nothing," he muttered, glaring at the floor. "Doesn't seem like nothing," I said. "Talk to me." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It's just everything sucks now, okay? Mom's gone. You're in a wheelchair, and nothing's the same anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't blame him. He wasn't wrong. "You're right," I said. "Nothing's the same. But that doesn't mean we can't figure this out together." He didn't respond, but the tension in his shoulders eased a little. The first few months were a blur of trial and error. Simple things like cooking dinner or doing laundry felt like climbing a mountain, but we found ways to make it work. I burned a lot of meals, and there were more than a few nights when we ended up eating frozen pizza or cereal for dinner. Jake and Maddie started stepping up in ways I never expected. Jake learned how to use the washing machine and started mowing the lawn, while Maddie took over packing lunches and keeping the house tidy. They weren't just kids anymore, they were my teammates. Financially, things were tight. The medical bills from the accident had wiped out most of our savings, and Kate wasn't exactly sending child support checks. I picked up some freelance work as a mechanic, fixing bikes in the garage whenever I could. One of my old buddies, Dave, started sending me referrals, and pretty soon, I had a steady stream of customers. Jake would help out after school, and Maddie started painting designs on the gas tanks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us afloat. One afternoon, Dave stopped by with a six-pack and a problem. "You're a lifesaver, man," he said, leaning against the workbench as I tightened a bolt on his bike. "I don't know how you do it." "Do what?" I asked. "Keep it together," he said. "If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I'd be able to get out of bed in the morning." I shrugged. What choice do I have? Jake and Maddie need me. That's all that matters. Dave nodded, cracking open a beer. "You're a better man than most, Mike." I didn't feel like a better man. I felt like a guy barely holding it together with duct tape and spit. The kids started to adjust little by little. Jake joined the middle school basketball team, and Maddie started taking art classes at the community center. They were finding their footing, and seeing them smile again made all the struggles worth it. But I wasn't just doing this for them. I was doing it for me too. I wasn't going to let Kate's decision define us. Then, one day, out of the blue, Kate called. It was late in the evening, and I was helping Maddie with her homework when my phone buzzed. Seeing her name on the screen sent a jolt through me, but I didn't answer right away. "Who is it?" Maddie asked. "Just a number I don't recognize," I lied, silencing the call. But Kate didn't give up. She called again the next morning and the morning after that. Finally, I gave in. "What do you want, Kate?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I wanted to check in," she said, sounding hesitant. "How are the kids?" "They're fine," I said curtly. "We're managing." "That's good," she said. I was thinking maybe I could come see them. Her words sent a wave of anger coursing through me. After months of silence, she wanted to stroll back into their lives like nothing had happened. "You don't get to do that," I said. "You don't get to pick and choose when you're a parent." "I know I messed up," she said, "but I want to make it right." "Then you should have thought of that before you walked out," I snapped, hanging up before she could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kate's words kept running through my head, and I couldn't decide if she was serious about making amends or just looking for an easy way out of her guilt. The kids didn't need more heartbreak, and neither did I. But I also couldn't ignore the tiny voice in the back of my mind, whispering that maybe, just maybe, She deserved another chance. The morning after Kate's call, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Letting her see the kids after what she'd done felt like a betrayal, not just of them, but of everything I'd fought to rebuild. At the same time, I couldn't shake the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was sincere. I spent the day going back and forth, turning the decision over in my head until I thought I'd go crazy. By the time Jake and Maddie got home from school, I still hadn't made up my mind. "Everything okay, Dad?" Jake asked, dropping his backpack by the door. "Yeah, I lied. Just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it. That evening, I finally decided to tell them about the call. "Your mom reached out," I said as we sat around the dinner table. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Maddie froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, while Jake's expression darkened. "What did she want?" he asked. "To see you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She says she wants to make things right." "Yeah, right," Jake muttered, pushing his plate away. "She just feels guilty." Maddie looked at me, her eyes wide. "Are we going to see her?" "That's up to you too," I said. "I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do." Jake shook his head. "I don't want to see her. She made her choice." Maddie hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know, Dad. I miss her. But what if she leaves again?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I can't promise she won't," I admitted. "But if you want to see her, I'll make it happen." In the end, they decided to meet with her, though Jake made it clear he was only doing it for Maddie's sake. We arranged to meet at a park near our house, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. I wanted to make sure the kids felt safe, and honestly, I wasn't ready to let Kate back into our home. When the day came, I could feel the tension radiating off Jake as we pulled into the parking lot. Maddie was quieter than usual, staring out the window as if she was trying to prepare herself for whatever was about to happen. Kate was already there, sitting on a bench near the playground. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her hands as she glanced around. When she saw us, she stood up, her face lighting up with what I could only describe as hope. "Hi, guys," she said, her voice trembling. Jake crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Maddie hesitated, then stepped forward and let Kate hug her. "It's so good to see you," Kate said, her eyes filling with tears. "Hi, Mom," Maddie whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake stayed where he was, his posture stiff. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. Kate flinched but didn't back down. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to apologize." "For what?" Jake shot back. "For walking out on us? For dumping us on Dad and acting like we didn't matter." Maddie looked at me, her eyes wide with panic, but I didn't step in. This was Jake's moment, and I wasn't going to take it away from him. "I know I hurt you," Kate said, her voice breaking. "I know I made a mistake, but I want to fix it. I want to be here for you now." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Now? What about all the times we needed you before? Where were you then?" Kate's tears spilled over, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the nights I'd spent trying to comfort Maddie as she cried herself to sleep, the frustration in Jake's voice when he said he didn't want to see her, and my sympathy evaporated. After what felt like an eternity, Maddie spoke up. "I want to give her a chance," she said, her voice trembling. Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "Maddie, she's still our mom," Maddie said, turning to face him. "And I miss her." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine. But if she screws up again, I'm done." Kate nodded quickly. "Thank you. Both of you. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm serious." For the next few weeks, Kate made an effort. She called regularly, stopped by to help Maddie with her art projects, and even came to one of Jake's basketball games. It was almost like old times, almost, but something about it didn't sit right with me. One evening, as Kate was helping Maddie clean up after dinner, Jake pulled me aside. "I don't trust her," he said bluntly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She's acting all nice now, but it feels fake," he said. "Like she's trying too hard." I nodded slowly. "I've been feeling the same way. What are we going to do?" Jake asked. "We're going to keep our eyes open," I said. "And we're not going to let her hurt us again." It wasn't long before Kate's true intentions started to reveal themselves. One night, after Maddie went to bed, Kate asked to speak with me alone. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone hesitant. "Maybe it's time for the kids to come stay with me for a while." Her words sent a jolt of anger through me. "You think you can just walk back into their lives and take over?" "I'm not trying to take over," she said quickly. "I just think it would be good for them to have time with both parents." "They've had plenty of time with you," I said, my voice cold. "And they're just starting to feel stable again. I'm not going to disrupt that because you feel guilty." Kate's face hardened. "This isn't about guilt. It's about what's best for them." "No," I said firmly. "It's about what's best for you." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite place. Then she stood up and grabbed her coat. "This isn't over," she said. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Kate's words, "this isn't over," stuck with me for days. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, like she'd already decided the outcome and was just biding her time. I knew her too well to brush it off as idle talk. At first, I kept it to myself. Maddie was still riding the high of having her mom back in her life. And even though Jake was skeptical, he seemed content to let things play out. I didn't want to rock the boat unless I had to. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first sign came a week later when Kate called Maddie and canceled their plans to visit the art museum. She said she has to work, Maddie said, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Jake rolled his eyes. Classic mom. Jake, I warned, though part of me agreed with him. It's fine, Maddie said quickly. She said we'll go next weekend. But next weekend came and went, and Kate canceled again. This time, she didn't even offer an excuse. A few days later, Jake came into the garage where I was working on a client's bike. "Dad, you need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "What is it?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. "It's Mom," he said, his voice tight. He handed me the phone, and I felt my stomach drop as I looked at the screen. It was a social media post. Kate at a fancy restaurant, all dressed up and smiling with a man I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Best night ever with my love." "She's got a boyfriend," Jake said flatly. I stared at the picture, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. While Maddie was sitting at home waiting for her mom to show up, Kate was out whining and dining some guy. "Does Maddie know about this?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "No, and you shouldn't tell her. She'll be crushed." That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. Kate's priorities had always been skewed, but this was a new low. She hadn't just let me down, she was letting the kids down too. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit back and let her play games with their emotions. I called Kate that afternoon. "Mike," she said when she answered, her tone cautious. "What's going on?" "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" "About you canceling on the kids," I said. "And about this boyfriend of yours." There was a long pause. "That's none of your business," she said finally. "It's my business when it affects Jake and Maddie," I said. "You've been stringing them along, Kate. They deserve better than that." She sighed. "I'm doing the best I can." "No, you're not," I snapped. "If you were, you'd be honest with them. Instead, you're off playing house with some guy while they sit here wondering why their mom can't make time for them." "That's not fair," she said defensively. "Fair?" I repeated. "You think any of this is fair? You walked out on your family, Kate. You don't get to lecture me about fair." She didn't respond, and I hung up before the conversation could spiral further. The next day, Maddie came home from school with a folded piece of paper in her hand. "What's that?" I asked. "It's from Mom," she said, handing it to me. She left it in my locker. I unfolded the note and read it, my anger flaring with each word. "Maddie, I'm so sorry I've been busy lately. I promise I'll make it up to you soon. Things have just been complicated. I love you, Mom." Complicated. That was Kate's favorite word, her catch-all excuse for every bad decision she'd ever made. "What do you think it means?" Maddie asked, her eyes wide. "I think your mom has some things she needs to figure out," I said carefully. A few days later, Jake and I were in the garage when Maddie came running in, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, wheeling over to her. "She lied to me." Maddie sobbed. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his tone sharp. "She said she had to work today, but I saw her at the park. With her boyfriend." Maddie cried. Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I knew it." I pulled Maddie into a hug, stroking her hair as she cried against my shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said. "We'll figure this out." "No, it's not okay," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Why doesn't she want to be with us? Why does she keep lying?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But that's on her, not you." That night, I sat down with the kids and had the conversation I'd been dreading. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "Your mom has a boyfriend. She's been spending time with him instead of being honest with us." Maddie's face crumpled, and Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Typical," he said. "I know this hurts," I said, "and I wish I could fix it, but the only thing I can do is promise that I'll always be here for you. No matter what." Maddie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jake didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told me he understood. The next time Kate called, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in her excuses. Not anymore. After Maddie's meltdown and the truth about Kate's boyfriend came out, something shifted in the house. The kids weren't just hurt, they were angry, and rightfully so. Maddie, who had been so eager to give Kate another chance, now barely spoke about her mom. Jake, on the other hand, didn't hold back his feelings. "She doesn't care about us," he said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. "She only cares about herself." "Jake," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "it's more complicated than that." "Stop saying that." He snapped, his fork clattering against his plate. "Why do you keep defending her?" "I'm not defending her," I said. "I'm just trying to help you understand." "No, you're not," he interrupted. "You're making excuses for her, and I'm sick of it." He stormed off, leaving Maddie and me sitting in awkward silence. "He's not wrong," Maddie said quietly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Over the next few weeks, Kate's attempts to reach out became more sporadic. She'd call once or twice a week, leaving voicemails filled with half-hearted apologies and promises to do better. The kids stopped listening to them after a while, and eventually so did I. It wasn't until one rainy Saturday afternoon that she finally showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the garage working on a bike when I heard her voice calling out from the driveway. "Mike, are you here?" I wheeled myself out of the garage, my stomach tightening at the sight of her. She looked tired, her makeup smudged and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "What do you want, Kate?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I need to talk to you," she said, glancing toward the house. "And the kids? They don't want to see you right now," I said bluntly. She flinched, but didn't back down. "Please, Mike, I just want to explain." I called the kids into the living room, warning them that their mom wanted to talk. Maddie looked nervous, while Jake's expression was a mix of anger and indifference. Kate sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I've let you down," she began, her voice trembling. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I've made mistakes, big ones, but I'm here now and I want to fix things." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "You're here now? After all this time? After everything you've done?" "Jake," I said softly, but he ignored me. "No, Dad. She doesn't get to just walk back in and act like everything's fine," he said, glaring at her. "You left us. You lied to us. And now you're what? Sorry? Is that supposed to fix everything?" Kate's eyes filled with tears. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right." Maddie spoke up, her voice shaking. "How? How are you going to make it right? You can't undo what you did." Kate didn't have an answer. She just sat there, her shoulders slumping under the weight of their words. After she left, the house felt heavy with unspoken emotions. Maddie retreated to her room, while Jake stayed in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it. I wheeled myself over to him and sat beside him in silence. "I don't get it, Dad," he said finally. "Why does she keep coming back if she's just going to keep hurting us?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know that we can't let her actions define us. We're stronger than that." Jake nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. Kate kept her distance after that. She sent a few texts and left a couple of voicemails, but for the most part, she seemed to understand that the kids needed space. For a while, things started to feel almost normal. Jake threw himself into basketball, and Maddie began working on a big art project for a school competition. I focused on building up my freelance work, pouring all my energy into making sure the house stayed running smoothly. But then, just as we were starting to find our rhythm again, Kate dropped a bombshell. It was a Friday evening when I got the email. The subject line read, "Custody Agreement Discussion." I felt my stomach churn as I opened it. "Mike, I think it's time we revisit the custody arrangement. I want the kids to spend more time with me, weekends at least. I know I've made mistakes, but I believe this is what's best for them. Please let me know when we can discuss this further." "Kate." I stared at the screen, my anger building with each word. She wanted custody? After everything she'd put them through? After abandoning them and lying to them? Not on my watch. I called my lawyer first thing the next morning. "Mike, this is going to be a tough fight," she said after I explained the situation. "Courts tend to favor shared custody, even when one parent has a history of poor behavior." "I'm not giving her weekends," I said firmly. "She doesn't deserve it." "We'll do our best," she said. "But you need to be prepared for the possibility that the court may see things differently." When I told the kids about the email, their reactions were exactly what I expected. "She wants what?" Jake said, his voice rising. "She doesn't even care about us." Maddie looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Are we going to have to go with her?" "Not if I can help it," I said. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and emotional conversations. The kids were scared, I was furious, and Kate was suddenly on her best behavior. showing up at school events and posting heartfelt messages on social media about how much she loved her family. It was all for show, and we all knew it. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom determined to fight with everything I had. Kate's lawyer argued that she'd turned over a new leaf, that she was ready to be the mother the kids deserved. My lawyer countered with evidence of her past behavior, her abandonment, her lies, her failure to follow through on her promises. The kids testified too. Jake spoke passionately about how I'd been the one constant in their lives, while Maddie tearfully explained how much Kate's actions had hurt her. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Kate's request for additional custody was denied. She was granted supervised visitation once a month, but that was it. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, Jake raised his glass of soda. To Dad, he said, for being the best parent we could ask for. Maddie grinned, raising her glass too. To Dad, I smiled, my heart full for the first time in months. To us, I said, clinking my glass against theirs. Winning the custody case felt like a victory, but it didn't erase the scars Kate had left behind. The kids were relieved, and I could see the weight lifting off their shoulders, but the damage was still there, lingering beneath the surface. Jake threw himself into basketball even more after the court ruling. He started practicing daily, sometimes for hours, pushing himself harder than I'd ever seen. It was like he was channeling all his anger and frustration into the game. Maddie, on the other hand, retreated into her art. Her room became a mini studio, with paint-splattered canvases leaning against every wall. She rarely talked about her mom anymore, and when she did, it was always in the past tense, like Kate was a chapter she'd already closed. Kate's supervised visits were sporadic at best. She showed up for the first one, all smiles and apologies, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. Jake barely spoke to her during the visit, and Maddie kept her distance, answering Kate's questions with short, polite responses. By the time the hour was up, Kate looked defeated. "I'll see you next time," she said as she hugged Maddie goodbye. "Maybe," Jake muttered under his breath. I didn't bother correcting him. The second visit was canceled at the last minute, with Kate claiming she had a family emergency. She sent a text to apologize, but neither of the kids responded. The third visit never even got scheduled. It became clear that Kate's efforts were more about appearances than genuine change. She wanted to look like she was trying without actually putting in the work. The kids noticed, and so did I. One evening, Maddie came into the living room while I was watching TV. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant. "Yes, sweetheart?" I muted the TV and turned to her. "Do you think Mom will ever really come back?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Do you think she'll ever be the way she used to be? Before everything happened?" I sighed, trying to find the right words. "I don't know, Maddie. People change, and sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes it's not. But what I do know is that none of this is your fault. You and Jake deserve parents who show up, and right now, I'm the one who's here." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I wish she'd just try harder." "So do I said, pulling her into a hug. Jake's anger toward Kate never really went away. One night, after a particularly intense basketball practice, he sat down next to me in the garage while I was working on a bike. "Dad, do you ever wish Mom would just disappear?" he asked, his voice low. The question sent a chill through me. "What do you mean?" If she's not going to be here, if she's not going to care, then what's the point? It's like she's just stringing us along, and I'm sick of it." I put down my tools and looked at him. "Jake, I get where you're coming from. I really do. But your mom's choices are her own, and we can't control that. All we can do is focus on the life we're building here." He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. As time went on, the gaps between Kate's attempts to reach out grew longer and longer. The texts stopped coming, the phone calls ceased, and the court-ordered visits faded into nothing. One day, Maddie asked if we could take down the family photos that included Kate. "They make me sad," she said simply. I nodded, my heart aching as I helped her take them down. Life slowly began to take on a new sense of normalcy. Jake's basketball team made it to the state championships, and Maddie's art was featured in a local gallery show. I was proud of them, not just for their accomplishments, but for the way they'd weathered the storm Kate had left behind. They were stronger than I ever could have imagined. One evening, about a year after the custody case, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mike," Kate's voice came through the line, hesitant and quiet. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For everything. For leaving. For not being there. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I hope someday you and the kids can forgive me." I took a deep breath. my mind racing. Kate, it's not about me. It's about them. And right now, they're doing just fine without you. There was a long pause. I understand, she said finally. I just needed to say it. She hung up before I could respond. I didn't tell the kids about the call. They didn't need the reminder of what they'd lost. Or maybe what they'd never really had to begin with. Instead, I focused on the road ahead. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Jake and Maddie were growing into incredible young people, and I was grateful every day for the chance to be their dad. Kate might have left, but we were still a family, and that was enough.